The congressional map-making process has now moved to the 7-member Ohio Redistricting Commission after a bipartisan committee of state lawmakers failed to approve a 15-district map by September 30th. This is the second phase of a 3-part process for drawing district lines for members of Congress that had bipartisan support and was overwhelmingly approved by voters in 2018. But as Statehouse correspondent Jo Ingles reports, Democrats and some voters say that process is not being executed as it was intended.
In March 2018, former Republican governor of California Arnold Schwarzenegger raised shots of schnapps alongside Republican and Democratic lawmakers in Ohio, celebrating a congressional redistricting plan that he said would terminate gerrymandering. It was built on the change voters made to the legislative map drawing process in 2015. Matt Huffman, who wasn't in office then after he was term limited out of the House, helped sell the idea to voters, saying it encouraged bipartisanship.
If the minority doesn't agree, and 2 members of the minority party don't agree, the map will only last for 4 years. Now, the majority can still redraw the map after 4 years. And so you may say, well, how does that help? Well, the answer is legislators and the other folks involved don't want the districts to change in that short of a period of time. They have an incentive to get a 10-year map, and that's true for the majority party and the minority party.
The process appealed to almost 75% of Ohio voters who voted for it. It was intended to have 3 parts. The first is a bipartisan legislative committee that is to come up with an agreement on a map before it goes to the Ohio Redistricting Commission, which had been created in the state legislative redistricting amendment voters approved in 2015. Now, in this current process, that deadline passed on September 30th without an agreement. And even though Democrats proposed a map before that deadline, Republicans haven't yet publicly unveiled a map and may not until the 3rd phase of the process. On its final day of work, Senate Minority Leader Nikki Antonio told the Legislative Committee that this is not what voters intended.
For a map to be passed, it was required that it be bipartisan. I interpret that as the will of the people for us to sit down and work together. I don't interpret it as we'll just sit back and run the clock out, which unfortunately seems to be what the plan is here. And that is disrespectful to the people of the state of Ohio.
Antonio said voters intended fairness to be part of the constitutional process, to which Republican Senator Jane Temkin responded this way.
The word fairness is not in the Constitution, correct? It's not in this constitutional.
Quiet in the crowd. We're going to have to ask that if you cannot refrain from outbursts, we're going to have to ask you to leave. Leader?
Sorry, Coach.
Please continue.
Thank you. So while the word, we'd have to do a complete combing of the Constitution to find out if it's in there anywhere.
I'm just referring to the congressional
just to this. I can tell you about other things that's not in there either.
But since that legislative committee couldn't come up with an agreement on the basic interpretations of the process, it's now up to the Republican-dominated Ohio Redistricting Commission. It has until the end of the month to come up with an agreement on a map that has buy-in from both Democrats on the panel. But it seems doubtful that will happen. Republicans who can pass a map with a simple majority of lawmakers in the 3rd phase of redistricting next month have repeatedly said the map isn't due until the end of November. And now House Speaker Matt Huffman says they may not show their hand until then.
Well, there isn't a map until I know what needs to go into it in order to get an agreement. And then we can present that to the public, but we also want the public having input. So we'll see what happens the next 31 days. And then, if that doesn't work, we'll start off in November with a new process, a new question to a new group of people.
But a map passed with only one party support which is what could happen if the process goes to supermajority Republicans in the legislature, won't last 10 years. Catherine Terser of Common Cause Ohio, who also worked to pass the current redistricting process in 2018, said that shorter time period for maps that are not bipartisan hasn't really worked as intended.
So one of the things that I think is really sad here is there are all sorts of ways where lawmakers, elected officials are encouraged to live up to the obligations in the Ohio Constitution. Now, clearly they're not adequate.
In 2021, when the last congressional map passed with no bipartisan support, it lasted 4 years. But if lawmakers pass a map along party lines this year, it will last longer.
So the way to think about it is things can change. You know, when we came together as a state to make changes, we were still a bellwether state, right? We were still a bellwether state. 4 years, you know, the difference between who the governor, the auditor, and secretary of state could be significant. And so this is the other reason why there was a sense, hey, it should be 4 years, because you could have different leadership on the Ohio Redistricting Commission, which will encourage people to actually get it done. 4 years also encourages people because, you know, if you're an incumbent, wouldn't you rather just know, hey, this is my district, I don't have to move, I don't have to, you know, you just like knowing what your district is. So the way to think about it is, okay, we tried to get bipartisan maps, didn't manage it. Let's take another go at that 4-year mark. So that's where we are, 2025. And those district lines will last until the next map making, which will be in 2031.
Terser and others, including Republican former Ohio Supreme Court Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor, asked voters last year to once again change the redistricting process for both the congressional and legislative redistricting. Their plan would have taken it out of the hands of politicians and given that power to a panel of appointed citizens instead. And Schwarzenegger, still advocating for fairness in redistricting, came back in March 2024, 6 years later, to rally for it.
Fair maps now.
This time around, the plan only had the support of Democrats and advocates, with Republican officials opposed, and many voters said they were confused about the language approved by Republicans on the Ohio ballot board that included one word: gerrymander. In a year where Ohio helped Donald Trump win a second term as president and no Democrats won statewide, the issue failed. It would take a lot of money to go back to the ballot to change the process again. So for now, the map drawing effort at the Statehouse continues under a process that many of its one-time supporters say is not working as intended. Jo Ingles, Statehouse News Bureau.